Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We'll be getting started in just a minute, but first I wanted to take some time to go over the format of today's webinar. All phones have been placed on mute. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the Questions tab in the menu. We will address questions at the end of the webinar as time permits. We will also be recording this session, and the recording will be sent out following the webinar. At this point, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Jeff Ziplo will start us off here.
Well, welcome everyone. I want to welcome everyone to the first of many cybersecurity-based webinars that we'll be having this year. Today's webinar is going to be on avoiding the attack and understanding the latest trends in cybersecurity and data protection. We have a lot of things to discuss today, and actually I'm really excited about today's webinar because I get to introduce to you two new partners that joined Bloom Shapiro, and they have a wealth of experience and knowledge, and very excited for them to be here. The first person is Heather Beerfield. Heather is joins us with over 15 years of experience managing risk and building information security management programs. She has a lot of expertise in cybersecurity, IT risk management, information security governance. She has a lot of knowledge regarding PCI, payment card industry, regulatory compliance, GDPR, which we're going to hear more about. Prior to joining Bloom in December of 2019, Heather was a principal at Markham, and so she served there as the national service line leader for cyber and risk IT services. So with her depth and background, she brings great credentials to Bloom. She also has, after her name, a number of alphabet soup type of certifications. So Heather, welcome today, and thanks for joining us. To my right, although you can't see to my right, is David Sun. David joined Bloom in 2019 as well. He had a practice, Sunblock Systems, and he merged his practice in with Bloom Shapiro. He has over 20 years of experience. David brings to Bloom some great experience in cyber forensic response and post-breach remediation. That's really his specialty. I know he's worked on a number of ransomware attacks, and we're going to get into that in quite a bit more detail. Government agency investigations for both public and private sector clients. David is also, or has also, testified in a number of expert witness situations for both federal and state courts in the areas of computer forensics and cybersecurity. He has served as a court-appointed independent expert in computer forensics, and he's also an adjunct professor at George Mason University. So, David, welcome.
Thank you.
And last but not least, my name is Jeff Ziplo. I'm a partner at Bloom. I have been for over 25 years, and I've been working in the cyber space and IT risk assessment for most, if not all, of those years. My areas of expertise, along with my two other colleagues, is cyber assessments, risk management services, information security governance. I've been working with, and now David will be also working with, the Connecticut and Florida's Office of Attorney General to provide guidance and support on cybersecurity matters. So that's a bit of who we are. And what I'd like to do is we're going to go on to the next slide and talk a little bit about the 2020 FBI predictions.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. And welcome, everybody. Good morning. We do actually a lot of work with the FBI in the area of cybersecurity, data breaches, those sorts of things. They really are a true partner with not only our firm, but other firms like us as well. Really digging down into understanding what the breach is and how we can remediate it and get organizations back on their feet and protected again. Trying to obviously identify where it came from and involving the FBI in that process. So as far as the FBI predictions for 2020 are concerned, I think none of these will really become as a huge surprise to any of you. But obviously right at the top is ransomware. It's one of the most prevalent threats out there. Organizations are experiencing this type of attack every single day. Many times, if you don't get a firm such as ourselves or someone else involved and they're just paying the fee or the fine, which is potentially the right course of action based on the instance, if they are actually patching or remediating where that ransomware came in from and they are performing better backups and taking care of it, people were seeing a trend that they're just getting hit time and time and time again. So it's not even just getting the data back, but it's also making sure that you don't fall victim to the ransomware attack again. The other thing that's really kind of a Wild West right now is a huge focus on cryptocurrencies. There isn't a lot of regulation around these right now. As far as from an IT standpoint, there is almost zero regulation. They also don't have strong controls in place because the processes haven't been defined too definitively at this point in time. So this is becoming a huge focus area as far as threats and attacks are concerned, because again, it's not highly regulated and people really don't understand what cryptocurrency is at this point in time. The third one is nation state actors, and their hacks are really pushing a sense of urgency onto their targets. So if they can make somebody panic, instill fear in them, having to act immediately, people don't take the time to really necessarily think through their decisions and fall victim to a lot of these attacks. They're becoming more targeted. Obviously, it's been in the news quite a bit as far as nation state actors are concerned, and the influence it has not only on, from a federal perspective, but also obviously across the world, and what we're seeing the influence being. They're really starting to have a huge impact on decisions that are being made and national security in itself. IoT devices. I think all of us have these in our life now at this point in time. I think one of them, the most prevalent one, is the Alexa or device, allowing our lives to become a lot easier. So I think people are beginning to become not lazy, but are more in tune with how much time it takes to do things. So everything's becoming highly automated, and we aren't thinking through what access these IoT devices actually have, what they can hear, what they can do, the types of attacks that can be triggered through just a simple either Alexa device. Quick story on one of these, and this is kind of one of the things that instills a lot more fear in myself, but I believe many of you probably have heard of the Jeep hack. It was when two engineers were testing out the computer systems within a Jeep. They hired an individual, kind of be the test case scenario, started driving down the highway, windshield wipers started going, the music started blaring, all of a sudden the lights were flashing, brakes didn't work, and they were able to take full control of this vehicle. This is something that we need to think about and how we are protecting ourselves against these types of things. Obviously, airplanes are becoming highly computerized. All of these devices that we're allowing not only outside of our home, but inside of our home, we have to think about how we're going to be not only protecting ourselves against them, but also, the threat that it imposes and instills on not only ourselves, but our communities and our organizations themselves. We're going to talk a little bit more about the mobile threats. I don't think anyone exists without a mobile device right now. I mean, now the thing is, do you only have one? Right? So we have multiple mobile devices. One of the biggest threats with these is that, again, it's that time that we don't take to protect ourselves. So everyone's automatically accepting the terms and conditions, and I don't believe anybody truly reads through all 90 pages of terms and conditions. Just as far as little tip on that front, use Google. So type in the name of the app, see if there's any huge security flaws within the app that you're trying to download. And someone actually has probably done that and put out information because they may have fallen victim to one of the attacks. The other thing is not always these apps are masked as a different app. So you might not actually be getting what you're thinking you're getting. And they do, a lot of the terms have access to any type of data that you input into them as well. So you need to really think about what you're utilizing for it and the need and the security around it. So moving on, I know GDPR is a huge hot topic. We do a lot of work with organizations throughout this because, again, a lot of the companies that we work with have either EU employees or overseas locations, but it's honestly any type of data that you have of an EU resident, that organization has to be in compliance with. one of the big trick items that people don't think about is that if on their websites, if they have any sort of marketing surveys or asking for more information, if someone from the EU actually is inputting their information, they still have to be in compliance with it. So there's a lot to think about, along with vendors and interns and all of those sorts of things that, at face value, our organizations are overlooking, which we're trying to help them understand, the bulk of the work and what it actually means to them. Cloud security, we're going to get a lot more detail as far as cloud security is concerned. But one of the biggest things is obviously if you put all of your information in the cloud, it's a less of a lift on your organization. The big thing is really understanding when you're signing up with a cloud vendor, who actually has access to that data? How many people? How is it controlled? Are you responsible for it? Are they responsible for it? Those types of things. So it's not just getting data off site. There's a lot more to it that you have to think about as you put your information up to the cloud. Now, cyber insurance is a huge topic. We get these questions asked of us almost multiple times a day. What's the right level? How do you decide? What coverage is there? One of the large things with cyber insurance that we've seen in the past is that there are clauses in some of the contracts that state, as of this date, your environment. So if there's a breach and they can't prove, or you can't prove that the vulnerability became prevalent after you obtained the insurance, they've been stating in the past that the vulnerability was pre-existing to the coverage. And so sometimes the contracts are null and void. Those contracts you have to read through very, very closely with a fine-tooth comb. So there are a lot of tricks that we can obviously assist you on and understand what your actual contract and level of cyber insurance needed is going to be. The other one that I thought was interesting, and it's more, I think we're seeing a lot more cases obviously in the news as well, is the emergence of this cyberbullying. Not only kids, but obviously professionals as well have access to each other 24/7 now because of all of these devices. And it's really taking a turn where this level of access and information that people are putting out about themselves is, making obviously cases for either cyberbullying, and it's not only necessarily happening with school-age kids, but it's also happening with employers and past ex-employers and ex-employees, as far as just either information that they may have taken or patents or things of that nature. So there's a lot to this, and I think, again, I don't think any of these are a huge shock to anybody sitting on the phone, but really starting to think about what they actually mean, not just the definition of them, but how it affects our everyday lives in our organizations is something you need to keep on the forefront of your mind before either clicking links or making decisions on either a level of insurance or anything of that nature. I am now going to pass it off to the latest cyber trends.
So let's talk about some of the latest cyber trends. And I think, Heather, you touched on it, but we certainly need to talk about ransomware. It has evolved, and ransomware is not what it used to be. What it used to be was ransomware got downloaded onto a PC. That PC got infected and then encrypted many aspects of not only the PC but the network. But we've seen ransomware transform itself, and what we're starting to see is that the actual ransomware occurs after an attacker has been in your network or on someone's PC for a fairly long period of time, extracting information, and all files are being encrypted, including backups and things like that. And what we're dealing with, we never before had to deal with the attackers, but now we seem to be negotiating with the attackers. And I know, David, you just had a most recent incident where you had to deal with all of this. What did you see? What did you find?
Yes. So what we're finding, as you said, Jeff, is that it's evolving. It used to be sort of a drive-by attack, and they do the encryption, you pay the money, and off you go, and that was it. Now what we're finding is that the attackers are spending time in your network ahead of time. They're researching your organization. They're understanding your organization. They're getting a sense for the organization's financials, so they can judge how much the ransom request should be. They want to make sure they get the most that the company can afford, but not ask so much that the company won't do it, right? So they're trying to drive the maximum value, so to speak, out of what they're doing there. So they're getting an idea of your financials. They're pulling your data out. They're exfiltrating your data. They had, generally speaking, they probably it's very likely they have a copy of your data, whereas before they're just encrypting it and that was it. Then after they've monetized or done everything they can, ransomware really is the parting shot because they can't do anything more to you. They've already done everything that they want. So that's when they initiate the encryption and they do the ransomware and they ask for the ransom. And what we're finding also is that these criminals are I don't know if evolving is the right word, but I would say the honor among thieves is going away. Before the idea was that you pay the ransom and they give you the key and they leave you alone. That's not the case anymore. We're starting to see where you have a couple things going on. We start to see that if you don't pay the ransom, maybe because you have backups and you don't need to, they will threaten to publicize online that they attacked you. So it becomes more of a blackmail than a ransom, okay? Just to shame the organization. We're also seeing that the traditional axiom of ransom is you pay it once and they leave you alone. Otherwise, why would anybody pay, right? We're starting to see multiple asks, 2 to 3 times. So you pay the initial ransom and then they usually come back and ask for more money once, possibly twice.
So
we're
quick
seeing
question on that. Can you actually negotiate with the attackers?
You can. We had one that we did not that long ago, very recently. The initial ask was $300,000, and we said we couldn't afford it. And the hacker went to his manager and got approval to talk it down to $200,000. And so it's like buying a used car, the traditional used car. So we were able to negotiate down to 200. But again, they came back with a secondary ask, wasn't very large. But there was an additional ask. And then the other thing we're seeing.
And let me ask you, sorry to interrupt, but how are you communicating with these attackers? I mean,
we'll set up either a text message or a WeChat, or they have some anonymous email account, or there's usually some type of out of band, so to speak, method of communicating with them.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And the last thing we're starting to see is that again, remember, they've probably exfiltrated your data. So sometime later, maybe months after you've paid your ransom and have gone about and resumed business as usual, you will get another ransom request, which is, we copied all your data and we want X number of dollars or X amount of Bitcoin. Otherwise, we'll publish this on the dark web for everybody. So kind of a secondary ransom that comes across sometimes.
Well, that's great to hear, David. Glad that they now have been finding new ways to monetize the whole ransomware attack. And I think what we're seeing, and the three of us spoke earlier, it's happening with more frequency. This is not something that happens once and you're done. This is, once you've been attacked, I believe, and I think, David, you would agree, that there are remnants that are actually stored on your network that will come out and rear its ugly head again, in the future. And
Yep.
so if you have ransomware, you really need to create a game plan on how to get rid of it and start from scratch on many of the devices. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to. You don't have to consider that. I mean, it's when we work with clients that are in the midst of an attack, it's always that cost benefit analysis. The business is down; they're losing millions of dollars because literally the business is completely shut down. Employees are staring at blank screens, walking around like zombies. So there's definitely that pressure to get things back up and running. If you get the decryption key, you run the decryption, you can be back to where you were before decryption, which is great. Except keep in mind that they've already been in your network. They've had their malware there. All their tools are there. And as I said before, the honor among thieves is breaking down. I mean, the idea that they won't bother you again, I don't know if that holds true anymore. So you get back to a situation where you have the malware in place, and then you have to think about whether they will come back and bother you again.
Right. So, well, let's move on. We've got a lot of other topics to discuss. I think the next one that probably makes sense to touch on is social media and phishing. And I guess let me start with phishing. Phishing, is something that has been around for a very long time. There, one of the things that I, did a little bit of work on is, or investigation, 4 new malware samples are created every second. So phishing's an easy way to go out and attack someone. We have gotten away, and I guess this is an area that's transformed as well. We've gotten away from the ability to look at an email and say, oh, the phrasing or terminology is incorrect, bad spelling or missing, periods or other types of things that you could spot very easily. That's no longer the case. And I think what we're seeing now is, these phishing attacks are pretty damn good. And we're really not in a position to, look at something and say yes or no. It's very difficult. Heather, any thoughts on that? What have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these phishing attacks occur based on they're doing their due diligence on social media and those sorts of things. I mean, 10 years ago, we used to say, okay, you didn't win the new car. Someone you don't know doesn't want to wish you happy birthday. You didn't win the vacation. Don't click on those links.
Nigerian princes aren't really interested.
Yeah. Random people don't want to marry you. Exactly. But we had a case where the chief HR officer was an avid knitter. It was very apparent on her social media accounts that was a strong interest of her. She got an email stating that she was receiving, this free magazine, and all she had to do was sign up for a knitting magazine. And before she even thought about it, was, wow, this is something very tailored to me. Obviously, I'm an avid knitter. I'm active in that community. And she clicked the link, and they were in and had access to everything she had access to. So, it's becoming much more targeted, and we make it very easy on the hackers to do these campaigns. We run them here ourselves, and we do the same thing. So we'll either ask our contact at the organization information about certain key individuals. So we'll tailor those phishing emails to those people, or we'll do our own due diligence on social media for people within the organization and tailor those emails specifically to individuals. So again, they are really coming through as far as something that you should be receiving. It's not just the wire emails anymore, and when the CFO and controller are off, those sorts of things. So a lot of the information is coming internally as well.
Yeah, I mean, what we're starting to see in terms of just for everybody to get a sense of sophistication, these guys, they go to a website, they'll go to a company's website, and they'll pull off, if you're a law firm, they'll pull off the company directory, because that's all on the website. If nothing else, you go to company website, you can see who the CEO is, you can see who the CFO is, their names. People's email conventions are usually, either first name and first initial, last name, first name dot last name, so they run through those permutations. It's pretty easy for them to get online and figure out what the hierarchy is for an organization. If it's not on the website, they can go to LinkedIn. That's what we see people do. Mm-hmm. They go to LinkedIn and they figure out who's working at a company, and they'll start making emails go back and forth between them. And then the other thing what they do is they start with a previous compromise. So they'll compromise somebody's system, and then based on that, they're reviewing all the email traffic between that person and everybody else they know. And now they have this social connection that they know about, and they'll take that person and impersonate that person they've compromised, trying to send emails to others that person usually communicates with. So I mean, it's very sophisticated, very targeted, and there's a lot of information that they can get their hands on to generate that social engineering facade that you'll fall for.
So I would add a couple of things to that. One is, and you may hear this many times in our discussion today, but this concept of multi-factor authentication, and where you should implement multi-factor authentication for email, for remote access, wherever you can, because that will help save you, that will help protect you. And we can certainly talk about multi-factor authentication in more detail later, but just that concept of multi-factor authentication is really important. The only other thing I wanted to bring up, right now is what I've been seeing is more and more email requests of employees who are saying, hey, I want to change my electronic paycheck, and I want you to use, a different bank account and routing information. And we're seeing more and more of those types of phishing attacks. And believe it or not, many organizations we've been working with don't have a more formalized vetting process to protect the employees. Same thing would be true with, vendors and how vendors, if they're receiving payments electronically, what is that vetting process to ensure that when I'm talking to a vendor, that, I know it truly is that vendor. And I think what we're trying to get to is have a formalized vetting program, call people to validate, have people come in on site to validate, and I think we'll be, much better off putting in some basic, security tenets to help protect our employees, our vendors, and ultimately the business itself. So let's move on to remote access and IoT, and I know that Heather talked a little bit about IoT, but let's talk about remote access. And I say this, I bring up the remote access comment because what we're seeing is, there are a myriad of vendors that have access to a business's network. Your HVAC vendor, your voice over IP, the VoIP vendor, any other type of support vendors that help you, your organization, support an application, support a network. And the point here is your security is only as good as those vendors' securities. So if those vendors don't have good security protocols, you're at risk. And I would say it's really important in today's world to understand what security protocols and practices your remote access vendors have to your network.
I completely agree completely. I mean, I think, Target breach, which was sort of the first big one, first of many, but one of the first big ones. I mean, I think that was the air conditioning HVAC vendor, right? They got compromised. They were able to remotely get into Target that way. So yes, you need to make sure your vendors are being secure. The problem I think most companies experience is that all their vendors tell them they're secure. Oh yes, we're extremely secure. But and unfortunately, it's hard for many clients, many companies to really vet that and understand and confirm that, because again, they're not security experts. So it is a challenge.
And I think we've seen a huge uptick in vendor management programs as well. We've actually been brought in more frequently to understand what the vendors are, how do they assess them, and then how do they assess them on an ongoing basis as well. Because just the initial assessment of a vendor from a security perspective doesn't mean that the vendor isn't morphing or changing or growing or shrinking, and ensuring that they still have the same level of strong security controls. So doing that assessment, depending on the level of risk the vendor is to the organization, whether it be on an annual basis, biannual, or some low risk we typically do every 3 years. So implementing that has become much more prevalent in the organizations that we're working with and the requests that we've been receiving.
So I think moving on to IoT is next, and I have an interesting statistic. By the end of 2020, there's going to be more than 7 billion IoT devices that are out on the market. Does that scare you, David?
That's more IoT devices than people on the planet or something, right? Is that about right? And it's especially scary since obviously a large percentage of the people on the planet, aren't connected to the internet. So I mean, for us that we're talking, that's probably 2 or 3 devices per person on average, it sounds like.
Yeah. So I was just thinking today, in my house or in my possession, I've got both Google and Alexa. I've got my oven that I can connect up to and turn on remotely. I have my Ring camera out in front. I have my, believe it or not, my washer dryer that I can turn on, and then my car. So I have 6 different devices, IoT devices, that I can control. Some have more concerns. I think, you were mentioning, Heather, about the Jeep. Was it a Jeep? Or
it was a Jeep. Yeah.
It was a Jeep that we could control remotely. I I want to say even in last night's newscast, there had been Ring had a breach that people were able to go in and take control and learn, and actually talk to people. It was a child that they were talking to, and again, what did they do to curb that? They implemented something I want to say yesterday, which was multi-factor authentication, right? Again, our best friend. And so I think, our IoT devices secure, many are not. And I would say probably most are not.
Yeah, I mean, I they're not, and they're never going to be secure enough. I mean, most of us have computers. We have Windows or Macs, or even our phones, and then every once in a while we find out about a Windows update or a Mac update, and we apply the updates. We apply the security patches. When was the last time somebody logged into their surveillance camera? When last time somebody logged into their Alexa to see if there's see their security updates? And to be honest, when was the last time anybody even had a security update for a surveillance camera? The vendors don't do it.
Right.
It's horrible. And so this IoT, have you checked to see if your washer and dryer has got a security fix, right, Jeff? I mean, no, it just doesn't happen. And so that is an inherent problem in this IoT stuff is that the stuff is getting pushed out. It's getting pushed out fast because they want to get in the marketplace and be competitive, first to market. There's going to be vulnerabilities, and there is not a patching program in place for any of these things.
It's not, and the reason we have these devices for ease of use for our life. So taking that additional step to secure these devices doesn't happen because that's additional work for us, right? I mean, they all have a lot of benefits. I mean, all the devices absolutely do. I mean, you mentioned the Ring camera. There was a kidnapped girl in Massachusetts, and they identified who it was because of a Ring camera on her road walking home. So there is purpose, but again, it's us taking that step to secure ourselves and our lives.
Right, and I guess the other piece of that is some of these devices like Google and Alexa are always listening. And so they're learning things about us. And I guess the point is just be careful. If you have the ability to implement multi-factor authentication, do it immediately. Let's move on to our smartphones. And I was just thinking the other day, the type of information that is stored on my smartphone. I realized I think I have credit card pictures on my smartphone. I probably have credit card numbers. I'm sure I have bank account information, social security numbers, and things like that. Smartphone attacks are occurring with increased regularity, and I think that what we need to do is start thinking differently about how we deal with smartphones. Thoughts, David?
Well, smartphones. I mean, I think this is a tough one. I mean, people go to bed with their smartphones, right? I mean,
We're connected, right?
And this is a part of your lives. So, this is a smartphone is probably more. People are more, for lack of a better word, intimate with their smartphones than they are people with people, right? I mean, the amount of information they store on it, the amount of information that they store on it knowingly or unknowingly, right? Because the smartphone, whether they know it or not, is capturing things like location data and all those things. But they put photographs on there and things. I mean, it is a major concern, and so we need to. I think people need to realize what's going on with the smartphones, and people need to understand a little better what can be done. Maybe that'll change how they act. I think not. I think the millennials maybe are calling it. I think most of the millennials have just given up on the concept of privacy. They don't care, and they just know that their stuff's out there, which is interesting because sometimes I can't believe what the millennials put out there online. But again, they just realize they have no privacy anyway. So what the heck? So I don't know. I don't have an answer for that one yet.
Well, I think that the thought here is there's a lot going on with smartphones. Be aware of what kind of data exists on your smartphone and how it's being protected. If your phone is not encrypted, I'd highly recommend encrypting your phone. I would tell you all phones can be encrypted these days.
Yep.
So whether you have an iPhone, any other type of phone that is available to you, certainly I would certainly recommend encrypting. Okay. I want to move on to cloud, because I think, the cloud is here with us. We certainly recognize that many businesses are either in the process of or already have migrated to the cloud. But I think there's a big question here, and that is, if there is a breach at that cloud vendor, who's responsible? Who's responsible for paying the fines? Who has to pay for the identity theft protection? Who has to, particularly depending on the type of information, if it's HIPAA, FERPA, financial, who has to report to the state? Who has to report to federal agencies if required? So, David, any thoughts on that, or Heather?
So I mean, my main thought on that is that, that's usually something, when you have a compromise, you do a forensic analysis, you try to figure out, what you're trying to figure out is if the vulnerability was created by the cloud provider or by the tenant, the customer of that cloud provider. And what I find, the vast majority of the time, the compromises that occurred wasn't due to a flaw in the infrastructure of the cloud provider, but generally was a flaw in how the customer implemented the systems. So, I'll give you an example. Not to name names, but it's a big name out there. So, Microsoft Office 365. We get called all the time about companies who have their email compromised that are in Office 365. All the time. Business email compromise. That's what we call it. I can't think of it. I don't think I've had a single one where it was attributed to something that Microsoft did. Almost always it was attributed to the customer not implementing security protocols that are in place. Now, am I saying Microsoft is completely not at fault? I wouldn't exactly say that. Their default implementation is very insecure, right? It's very open, which makes it easy to get data into the cloud and get things up and running. But Microsoft has done a pretty good job of providing security protocols that you can implement. It's just that most customers don't know about them or they don't implement them. Microsoft gives away multi-factor authentication. There's that word again. Microsoft gives it away for free to all of their Office 365 customers. It's a free service. However, it is not enabled by default because it takes a certain level of expertise to get it up and running.
Right.
Yeah, and I think, again, this attributes to the fact it's ease of use, right? So the cloud is easy to use. It puts responsibility a little bit more on the cloud provider than it does the organization. But it's that initial setup. So getting and understanding that contract that you have with your cloud provider, a lot of times it will list out all the things that David has mentioned. It'll say, these are the things that you should do, but people are too quick to sign. And then as they get into the implementation, they aren't thinking about those other things afterwards, because now it's been implemented, it's off their mind, they feel like they're not responsible for it. But also trying to add some clarity. So some of those contracts aren't clear at all. There's a lot of gray area within them. So trying to negotiate those contracts right up from the front, so who owns your data, who has access to it, how many people have access to it, those sorts of things all can be implemented into the contracts. Some of the large cloud providers, again, I won't name names, but they're obviously a little more difficult to negotiate with because their contract is their contract, and you either take it or leave it. They have enough, bandwidth as far as customers are concerned that they probably don't need you as a customer. But, at least thinking about those things and understanding what they are will put you in a better position if and when there is a breach occurs. So
Heather, a quick question for you. If should I consider working with a cloud vendor if they don't have a SOC 1 or SOC 2?
I would say it'd be a little tricky. They would have some other means of showing you that they have a secure environment and they have security controls there, whether it's a NIST assessment they went through or some other type of security assessment. But I would absolutely do my due diligence on my cloud provider because, again, they have all of your data. They have access to your most confidential and critical data. So you want to make sure they are locked down.
So for those of you who may not know, a SOC stands for Service Organization Control. SOC 1 is typically for organizations that deal with financial types of transactions. The SOC 2 is associated with a number, 5 different domains, which is security, availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, and privacy. And you can be audited against security and any of the other 4. More to come on that, because that's a whole nother topic for another day. The other point that I'm going to add on to what David had mentioned, above and beyond the multi-factor authentication as it relates to Office 365, one of the things I highly recommend is disabling the ability to forward messages, right? Forwarding messages, and what we've been seeing with a lot of the attacks is what they'll do is they'll go in and they'll set up forwarding rules. And so now the attackers are seeing all emails that are coming to a particular individual. And in some instances, they're deleting those email messages as well, so that only the person that is getting that forward email is knowing what's going on.
Yep, that's how they hijack and have a conversation using your email account to change where the money gets wired or whatever it is they're doing.
Exactly. All right, let's move on. Social media.
All right, so we just wanted to touch on social media. Again, to be prevalent in a business organization or world, typically, social media is mandated. You want to be relevant, you want to be on LinkedIn, you want to be on these types of social media accounts. These examples are more just so people are making themselves aware of what type of information that they're putting out there. These obviously are very extreme examples, but you think about it, and I've done presentations before where we get the attendee list ahead of time, and David had mentioned this earlier as far as LinkedIn being a very good resource, especially from a business standpoint, where we know what boards that they sit on. So those are obviously listed. In most boards, agendas and schedules are posted publicly as well. So we'll call people out in the crowd and say, oh, how was your meeting at this location last night for this organization? And their face goes white and says, how do you even know that, right? So the shock value on what people actually put out there is, I think if we all looked at all of our social media accounts, we would have things that we didn't know why, the reason or the point of really posting some of those things are. So you need to know what's out there about yourselves. Social media is becoming very much more proactive in not only, data breach cases, but crime solving as well. So, thinking about things where they're threatening, you're posting something saying they're going to kill your wife or things of that nature, they don't care. That makes it very easy for law enforcement agencies to understand and solve these types of crimes, and they're becoming more and more prevalent. Obviously, the GPS tracking systems on phones, right, and using the Find My iPhone apps, all of these types of things that we have turned on and listed about us will help place us in certain areas. Also will give information about things. This poor 20-year-old, I think, at that point in time, she didn't really understand what she was doing, but she was trying to be cool, saying, she was drunk and she didn't care, and so too drunk to care. But she posts that out there, and then, unfortunately hits and kills these 2 other individuals. It's not hard to figure out that she obviously had been drinking. She's been telling everybody that. So you do have to be aware of how you're using these accounts, what they're using them for. I'm terrified of my kids getting into the social media world eventually. I think I will ban them for life maybe, or have to go under a different name. From a professional standpoint, one of the things that I'm most concerned about is what my employees are posting. So if we're going to a big proposal or a big pitch, and that organization wants to vet the individuals who are going to be working on that engagement, I don't want that kid that's coming out of college having pictures of themselves either doing keg stands or posting any type of information like this. It really does have an effect. There's not a line between your personal and professional life anymore. The world's really blurred. So we really need to start thinking about what we're posting out there about ourselves. And this is just an example of how they are using social media to actually solve different crimes, right? We do it too from a cyber standpoint. These are just are easier to understand, but you post a picture online as far as trying to identify an individual who, in this case only stole $100, but at the same time, if you're offering any sort of reward or people are bored and sitting on social media, think about that. There's 1.4 thousand views. This was only posted for 43 minutes, 39 comments, 46 shares. People are sitting all over social media. So, really be aware of what you're posting out there about yourself and how you're presenting yourself. There are a million really entertaining videos on YouTube about, password security and what you're putting on your social media account, where people, hide in vans and just quickly Google people on the street, and, they find out everything about the person.
So once it's out in social media, can you do anything about it? Is there anything that, that you can, is there any take backs, if you will?
The internet's pretty permanent. But sure, you can try to delete it, right? And you can hide things, and a lot of social media sites, do provide options for delete. But there's people out there who monitor who are staring at their feeds all day long, right? And so somebody's going to see it probably before you realize, you shouldn't have posted it on there.
And that's even like Snapchat, right? So people think that instantaneously goes away and that's deleted. That's definitely not the case, right? So what they're telling you and how they're branding themselves may not be the most accurate of details. So be careful.
I think, thank you, Heather. Let's move on to the deep and dark web. And David, I think that this is an area that is near and dear to your heart, if you will.
Yeah, we're starting to get a lot more concerned about what's out there on the deep and the dark web. So for those who don't know what that is, when we go to Google and you type in something into Google or any search engine, it comes back with a wealth of websites and places that match what you're searching for. And those are all places that Google has crawled before and indexed or knew about, so that when you entered in a search term, it knew to provide you that result. As hard as it may be to believe, all that information that Google or Bing or any of those search engines knows, that really only represents, maybe 10 to 20% of the information that's really online out there. And an easy example for people to visualize or understand what I mean by that is, if you go to any of those travel or hotel booking websites and you enter in a date, you will get information on availability, right? Well, if you go and search, Google for a hotel chain's schedule or prices for an airline, you're not going to get the airline's website back. Google has not indexed the airline. Okay, Google does have an alternate, Google Flight Service, but that's a little different. So my point is there are lots of websites out there that Google doesn't index and doesn't search. None of the search engines do. And those, so the sites that the indexes do crawl and make available instantly, we call that the surface web. And like I said, that's 10, maybe 20% of all the content that's out there. Then we have what we call the deep web, which is stuff that's online. If you knew the website to go to, or if you got past the whether it's the login or putting in a location and date you want to fly or whatever other information is that you can get more information, we call that the deep web. So that's a place that you can use your browser and explore to it, but you might have to put something in order to get access to it. Then we have what we call the dark web. Now the dark web is sort of this intentionally obscured, anonymized, and hidden portion of the internet. It's part of the internet that you can't use your browser, your normal internet browser, to see. You need a special technology. It's called Tor, or the Onion router, and it's basically a browser or special tool that allows you to see the dark web sites. And again, collectively between the deep and the dark web, that's probably 80% of what's out there. So in other words, there's a lot of information out there that people don't know about, and especially on the deep web. You go there, and on the dark web, the deep, especially the dark web, that's where people go to have conversations and discussions and share information that they don't want others either to know about, or at least not know that they're the ones sharing. So, unfortunately, child pornography, prime example. That is the kind of stuff that people share on the dark web because it's anonymous. It's almost impossible to track where it comes from, and people can share it. So if you know the secret room or portion of the dark web where you can get access to child pornography, it's going to be there. Other things that you're going to find on the dark web are going to be hackers, where hackers are talking about the latest attacks and who they've compromised, and they will post the data that they've gotten out of there on the deep and dark web. So I'll give you an example. The Capital One breach that we found out about, 4 months ago, right? that was everybody found out about that or figured that out because the person who compromised the data posted it on the deep and dark web. Capital One did not get notified about this through internal mechanisms. They got notified because somebody sent an email to their anonymous tip line that says, hey, somebody's posting your data on the deep web. You might have been compromised. That's how Capital One found out about it. So again, compromised data is being put out there from corporations and individuals. You can buy a service that will look for your PII, personal identifiable information, social security number, on the deep and dark web. But what really needs to happen is corporations need to be thinking about being more proactive and seeing if their information might be out there. And that's something that we're doing now. We're having a lot of companies and entities coming to us, asking us to proactively monitor the deep and the dark web to see if their information is out there. They're giving us their corporate username and passwords. They're giving it to us securely. And we're crawling the deep and the dark web to see if that information is being shared out there.
So we actually have tools, David, that
Yes.
will do that
Yes.
in a very secure way, I would
Yes.
imagine.
Yes, exactly. We have tools that are doing that. We're crawling for sensitive information to see if it's out there. We also have clients who who are part of controversial organizations, and they are worried about people organizing and trying to disrupt their business operations.
Mhm.
So whether it's organizing protests, organizing strikes, or stalking executives, so physical threat to executives. So we are crawling the deep and the dark web for mentions of events. Maybe there's going to be some type of event that they're hosting. So we might be crawling the deep and dark web to see who's talking about it, because maybe they're talking about organizing a rally or a protest in front of the event. We also have clients that we are crawling the deep and dark web for the CEO's spouse's name, their kid's name, their home phone numbers, the names of the school their kids go to, because they want to know if people are out there talking about and circulating this information about them, because that could represent a physical threat to them.
Got it. Isn't it true that you can also buy variants of ransomware or variants of other malware on the deep dark web? Use it to generate new business opportunities?
You can buy ransomware. You can buy ransomware as a service now. There are people out there who offer it as a service. I think the last one quick story. The last ransomware I went and responded to. I think they used ransomware as a service because when we were talking with the hackers and they gave us the decryption keys, it didn't work. And so I could tell they were reaching out to tech support. It's what it felt like. They had to go back to the people who created the decryption programs because it didn't seem like it worked. So you can do that. Something a little more serious, on the deep and dark web, there are hit lists, right, where you can hire hitmen to kill people that you want. So you can hire hitmen for hires, and there are websites that are hit lists. So again, going back to what we're monitoring for, we have clients who come to us because their names have appeared on hit lists, and they're very concerned about what's really going on out there. So the deep and the dark web, and again, a whole nother webinar. It's the wild, wild west out there. It's what the internet was like back in the 90s when who knows what was going on, and it was crazy.
Yeah, and a lot of this too, you don't even have to go to the deep dark web if you want to be a hacker or understand that there's so many free tools out there, different websites that you can just Google, they'll pop up. And then the more intense ones are stuff that David's talking about. But if there's Facebook groups, there's things of that nature that will take you step by step how to use some of these tools and where to go. Obviously, they take them down as they identify them, but they keep us popping up under different names, in all different chat rooms.
So I guess we've heard a lot about the bad, right? And some of the challenges that that we need to be thinking about. I think, and we're going to end with this, but what should we be doing, right? How should we attack these problems? How should we be thinking about cybersecurity? And I know that in future webinars, we're going to take a deeper dive into some of these areas. But, what are, the top things we should be doing? I'll take the first one because I think it really is important to perform a risk assessment, right? To really understand what information we have stored, where is it being stored, and how is it being secured? I would say that is very important. I know we did this with a client and they were shocked and surprised that there was a folder that a lot of HR information, personal information, social security number, phone numbers, addresses, and things like that, were stored. And so, this risk assessment is both data-driven, technology-driven, user-driven, but performing a risk assessment, I think, is an important piece. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's this is a problem, right? And like any problem, whether it's cyber or not, it's understand the problem, perform the risk assessment, keep an eye on the problem, monitor, right, in real time if you can, and if something pops up, look into the problem, right, and follow up, and don't just blow it off and be too busy for it. So I mean, I think that's kind of the thing, the real time monitoring or the risk assessment, and then the real time monitoring, and then investigating. It's a fairly straightforward concept. It's just requires doing it.
Right.
And the thing too with the risk assessment, it also identifies where you should be spending most of your time, where your most critical risk areas are as well, which will trigger as far as where you're monitoring more heavily, and knowing exactly what type of information is out there. And that's part of the investigating kind of David's talking about, and the data classification and data identification as well. So, to Jeff's point, that's a critical first step, but it feeds into the other areas.
So when we talk about real-time monitoring, we're talking about tools that will ingest information on your network and look and see, is someone knocking at, on my network door? Are we phoning home to some place in Asia or overseas in some way, shape, or form? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So this again another topic, right? But you want tools that are out there looking to see what's going on. You mentioned is somebody knocking on my network door. I guarantee somebody's knocking on your network door. There's a whole crowd of people knocking on your network door. Every minute somebody is scanning your network. That's just the way the outside of your network. The idea is to have the sophisticated tools in place to weed out that noise and understand the ones that you need to care about, because a lot of it is noise, but it's only the one person that you need to care about. That if you miss, that's the one that's going to get you.
Yeah. It is making sure those monitoring tools are configured appropriately to David and Jeff's point, identifying what events need and require the investigation, that deeper dive to identify what really is going on.
So I know we're running out of time, but there's one bullet on this slide that I just need to ask about, and it's the event and travel advisories. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that got kind of thrown in as part of some of the deep and dark web stuff that we were talking about before. We have clients, again, the high profile clients where highly controversial. We're doing travel and event advisories where if they're hosting a seminar or hosting an event, or if the chairman of the board is going somewhere, we're doing the advanced research to see if anybody's talking about it, to make sure we know what we're looking for.
Yeah, and also understand if an attack's coming from any of those different countries. We have a lot of clients that just absolutely ban any traffic in and out of certain countries across the world. So, it's really understanding what's going on, to both of your points, and either blocking or at least doing your due diligence investigation on some of those areas.
Sounds good. So from a QA perspective, I know we're running out of time, but if I could just ask, there was some people that had identified some questions ahead of time. I'm going to put Heather on the spot. Heather, name 2 things that people need to implement right now to help protect them.
Well, one, doing the due diligence, right? So being proactive, understanding exactly what information you have and what's out there. And again, we talk about the 2-factor authentication, protecting all of your devices, not only yourself, but your organization. Even though it is kind of a pain and it slows you down, it is paramount that you put security first.
Sounds good. David, your thoughts. What are your top 2?
I think, Heather's got some 2 really good ones. I think one I'll add is we talked a lot about IoT devices and security. I think your washer and your dryer need to be on a separate network from your personal computer and cell phone. I think that's, the hardware providers, the people who sell the home Wi-Fi systems, they've gotten a little better, because now they offer you a guest Wi-Fi feature, right, where you can have guests come in and not be inside your network. They need to take it the next step and do what we do at corporations, or what we tell people to do at corporations. They don't always do it, which is to divide up their network into different segment their network into different zones. And one of the zones should be your IoT devices. So that camera that never gets patched, when it gets hacked, they can't get in and compromise, your personal computer that's got your banking data, for example.
Got it. So I'm going to add my last 2 cents and we really haven't talked about it much today at all, but train your employees. We can have the best and most sophisticated hardware and software in place, but we really need to train our employees to make sure that they understand their responsibility as it relates to security of not only their personal security, but the security of the business. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us. I am very excited to have both David and Heather working with me, working at Bloom. They bring a tremendous set of skills, knowledge, assets, and there'll be more webinars to come so that we'll share more exciting stories and information with all of you. So thank you very much again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great to see you. You got a new job.